Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the possibly contentious issue of is communism or international socialism, call it what you will, or the various splinter names that it's got, like Bolshevism. Is this a uniquely Jewish gig? Is it a Jewish thing? Is it a Jewish plaything, a Jewish toy? Now that assertion's been around really since the days of Karl Marx. So as he was formulating his sort of the Communist Manifesto in the 1840s and really since then. So it's been, and particularly as the idea of a communist state was, and particularly the international socialism, workers of the world unite, that sort of thing. So for say 120, in fact, long, probably 140 years, really close to 150, the idea of Jews and communism, socialism being kind of one of the same thing. If you talk about Jewish activism, political activism, immediately you'd reach for communism and socialism. And the other way around too. You talk about communism, the activists there, you go straight to the Jewish people. Now, rightly or wrongly, that's the association. As we go through, Marx and of course his compadre Engels, who was a Jewish industrial from a Jewish industrialist family in Germany. And you go, to Trotsky, the Jewish guy. I think Schreiber was his name. So he was a Jewish thinker of some proportions, and if you look at the people around the Russian Bolshevik Revolution, the number of, if not at the very front line, certainly in the second line, the number of Jewish people was quite remarkable. If you look at the international socialist meetings that were being held in Europe during the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then you look at the amount of Jewish people there, it was quite quite remarkable that what 2 or 3% of the world population is Jewish, and yet you can have 60, 70, 80% of the people, the activists, the primary activists in these international socialist meetings were Jewish. So Jews were hugely overrepresented amongst the communist and socialist activist movements. I'll come back to reasons why in a minute. But the idea that communism and socialism and Jewish activists were one and the same is not unreasonable. Were they 100% Jewish? Of course not. They're movements. But the prominence of whether at the apex or in the numbers of the proportion of Jews in these activist movements and groups in communism or socialism was certainly considerable, and so it can't be dismissed out of hand. Was it totally a Jewish gig? Well, no. So we can dispel that pretty early on. Now, in the next stage was the amount of people that drew the parallel between the amount of gay lesbian folks, gay lesbian Jewish people no less, that were in these activist movements. We can refer to people like Rosa Luxemburg, for example. She's a lesbian Jewish feminist icon and a midget no less, and a teacher, for goodness sakes. And she was big in the and she ended up dying actually in 1919, and she thought that along with Karl Liebknecht, thought that the German working class would rise up and create a dictatorship of the industrial proletariat and so on. Now, so when you look at the sort of the profile of the classic communist activist that really came in, again, late 1800s into the 1900s, that they would be Jewish, they would be gay or lesbian, and they would be a teacher or an academic of some sort. Now, Now, it didn't mean that every single one fell into that category, but the people who met that profile were sufficiently numerous in the communist socialist movements that you could say, well, that's a stereotype that's real. It's not an invented stereotype. This is real. Now, the same, of course, if you look at, say, the FBI in the 1930s and their profiling, or even law enforcement agencies before the formal creation of the FBI, their profile of activists in the United States who were pushing communism and socialism, their profile was the same. It was Jewish, gay, lesbian, and an academic or a teacher. And there were a small number of blacks that were included in that, but primarily. But if we need to look at this through a different lens, socialism and communism has irresistible attractions for people that see themselves as outsiders. We can't ever be in the mainstream. So if we have an ideology, communism, that purports in creation of some sort of a Marxist paradise, that where everybody's equal, then nobody is an outsider anymore because everyone's equal. And that means those at the apex are dragged down, those on the outside are brought in, and everybody's equal. It's a paradise, it's a nirvana, it's a heaven. And we want a society like that where we won't be outsiders anymore. So the attraction is as much that. Now, running in parallel to that, if you look at the Jewish kibbutz structure, where it's very communal. I mean, you could argue it's socialist or communist, but it's very communal and designed for survival, among other things. But whether a kibbutz fits into an advanced industrial society, that we can debate. But this idea of through communal help, assistance, and sharing, and so on, where everybody has to work, of course, but we can produce a society where equity and equality exists, where no one's an outsider, and so on. Now, the kibbutz is a Jewish thing, and again, it has its place in those sort of agrarian or agricultural and rural societies where, like in any farming or anything, there's always work to be done. Always a lot of work, whether it's milking the cows or feeding the chickens or churning the butter. It doesn't matter. There's lots of work to be done, and always is. And so everyone needs to help, and that's the same in any farm. The children work, everybody works, because there's mending fences, whatever. There's always work to be done. So, given the Jewish background, ideological background in kibbutz, given their belief that they are outsiders, and the kibbutz being the sort of, if you like, the framework, everyone's equal, then the attractions of communism, socialism would have been considerable. Everybody's equal. Now, it's also a Jewish rite of passage, if you will. We have to leave the world a better place than we found it. And it's kind of code speak in the Jewish diaspora for we have to re-engineer Gentile society so it's less dangerous to Jewish society. And that's what making the world a better place, making it safer for Jewish people. And if we can re-engineer those Gentiles so they think and behave and act differently, and then we will be safer, then the world is thus a better place. Thus, we have contributed to this. So a lot of the things that we see, the wokeness and the equity programs and equality programs, these sorts of things, it's all built around a foundational ideology of how can we create a society where, in theory at least, everyone's equal, and or where, more importantly, there are no outsiders. Even the trans, lesbian, black, one-legged, but that they are being brought into the fold. So no matter how extreme the definition or construct of an outsider is, they're all now within the camp. There are no outsiders anymore. And if you look at the worldwide, the creation of these new subgroups that are outsiders must be brought in. The definitions are nearly always done by Jewish people, again, because it's the idea of nobody must be an outsider. And if we can create and invent the tiniest sort of gradations of what an outsider is, but then say you discriminate against that outsider, that means you're a morally reprehensible person, you are fucking Hitler, then everyone is now, outsiders don't exist anymore. Now, communism purports, although it doesn't deliver, communism purports to do that. It's a completely equal society. No one's an outsider. So these attractions with, again, the foundational groundwork that a kibbutz supplies would have drawn Jewish people to that. We're outsiders here. In Gentile society, we're outsiders here. So if we can create a society where there are no outsiders, then we are no longer outsiders, and therefore. So that's the rationale it goes through. Now, there's a few sort of commentators say, well, really, Karl Marx wasn't brought up as a devout, practicing, Jew going to the rabbi every day for instruction and guidance, that sort of thing. He was brought up, so I suppose, as a minimal Christian. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. Karl Marx was still Jewish, and he would have been treated as Jewish. He was still treated as an outsider. He was, I think, in northwest Germany. So now Engels also was quite a wealthy, or his family was quite a wealthy industrialist. They owned business, factories, that sort of stuff, and he was very Jewish. And you can see in his finishing off of Das Kapital, because that wasn't a completed work when Marx died, and his contribution to, say, the Communist Manifesto, you still see that very Jewish view of we're outsiders and we want to create a world where we will no longer be outsiders, and a world where Jews will no longer be outsiders, where in order to do that, we have to say that nobody can be an outsider. And in the middle of the crowd, as it surges into the middle, we'll be in and amongst that crowd of no longer outsiders. So even though Marx and to some extent Engels weren't brought up as, again, devout, every day at the synagogue type people, they still had that Jews as outsiders thing. Now, if we look at people like, say, Rosa Luxemburg, the activist who tried to get revolution going in Germany there, and it's called the Spartacist uprising. She again had these views, very much these same views of I'm an outsider. Now, Rosa Luxemburg had she's like 4'9" or something, and I think she also had a withered leg as well as that. So she'd have been an outsider on a number of fronts. She couldn't get male attention, so she became a lesbian, and all this sort of stuff. And she had, again, this same view that if we create a paradise of equality, then we and I, me, a Jewish lesbian, midget, no one will be an outsider, because everyone will be considered as equal, having equal human worth, dignity, and all that sort of stuff. So it's very much a cover story for creating a world of equality where Jews will no longer be outsiders. And I mean, you could argue it has its merits, but in that sense, I believe it was disingenuous. Was it really equality? Because Rosa Luxemburg thought, well, or at least if you understand her writings or interpret as I do, that there'll be a concept of there won't be any outsiders, but there will be moral superiors to provide the moral guidance, and we the Jews will provide that moral guidance. That needs to be also taken into account. Now, if you look at people like Trotsky, the Jewish guy in the Bolshevik Revolution, where he and Lenin worked closely together for some time, Trotsky was someone, by the way, as did Rosa Luxemburg, someone who, in pursuit of ideological purity, this communist utopia, really any amount of collateral damage is acceptable, because you're creating a world of new ideas and again, a paradise. And in pursuit of that paradise, it doesn't matter what damage you cause, how many people you kill. They're non-believers anyway. So, and if you don't believe in the paradise, you should be killed. And you look at Trotsky. Now, Trotsky was certainly an intellectual in his own way, but his acceptance of mass carnage in pursuit of this paradise of equality, it seems to me at least to be brutality and horrendous brutality on steroids, and while at the same time he's pointing the finger at others, saying, "Well, hey, you're in the trash can of history if you don't believe what I believe, and I'll kill you if you don't believe it." I mean, it's quite astonishing that anyone could think that way, but such ideological fanatics are that way, and there certainly was an oversupply of Jewish people in there. Now, quite a few of the Jewish people were leaving Europe anyway and going to the United States. There was the Russian Tsarist pogroms in the 1880s and 90s. A lot of Russian Jews went to the United States in the Northeast. And I think I've met many of them in there in New York and Philadelphia and Boston, all around. Some of them are very, very bright. Aura, actually, how bright some of them are. So, but they all seem to adhere to the same thing. As you get, I'm sitting down having, I had a nice breakfast once with these guys, and they're all Jewish. And I had, not that I'd thought about it, but they got together and they were trying to convince me that paradise around the corner was possible if only those damn Gentiles would change their behavior. And I'm not so sure about that. I had to smile sweetly and nod and I didn't want to, had to do business with these guys, so I didn't want to tick them off too much. But looking at the overall thing, is communism and socialism a Jewish gig? Well, not in itself, no, but it is something that purports to promise a society where there are no outsiders, and that's the flame that the moths are running to. And so to assume that in itself it's a communist, the Jewish the Jewish activism and communism are the same thing. It's not. It's that. But the second thing it holds or purports to hold is that there will be a form of moral leadership rather than a capitalist or monetary leadership. And in that moral leadership, the Jewish diaspora will be in predominance. So it purports not only to have no outsiders, but to say, well, you'll be the moral guardians of how that society develops and how it is controlled and administered, not the Gentiles. And in that sense, it's also attractive to the Jewish diaspora. So that's my take on it. James Lindsay recently did a piece on it, and he argued or debated from, if you like, a different standpoint. But that's my take on it. I'd be interested to see your comments below. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.